There are only 3 chapters left in 1 Samuel. The saga of David and King Saul is quickly coming to a close. Now we're here in chapter 29, and the story picks up where we left off with David. Last time we saw David, he was living in the land of the Philistines. He had lied to the king, Achish, and David was forced to march to war against Israel. But as we'll see in a surprising twist, God used the mistrust of the Philistine princes to spare David. So 1 Samuel chapter 29, it's only 11 verses. Then the Philistines gathered together all their armies at Aphek, and the Israelites encamped by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed in review by hundreds and by thousands, but David and his men passed in review at the rear with Achish. Then the princes of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me these days or these years? And to this day I have found no fault in him since he defected to me." But the princes of the Philistines were angry with him. So the princes of the Philistines said to him, "Make this fellow return, that he may go back to the place which you have appointed for him. And do not let him go into battle with us, or in the battle he will become our adversary. For with what could he reconcile himself to his master, if not with the heads of these men? Is this not David, of whom they sang to one another in dances, saying, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s?'" Then Achish called David and said to him, "Surely as the Lord lives, you have been upright, and your going out and your coming in with me in the army is good in my sight. For to this day I have not found evil in you since the day of your coming to me. Nevertheless, the lords do not favor you. Therefore return now and go in peace, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." So David said to Achish, "But what have I done? And to this day, what have you found in your servant as long as I have been with you, that I might now go up and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Then Achish answered and said to David, "I know that you are as good in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the princes of the Philistines have said, 'He shall not go with us to battle.' Now therefore rise early in the morning with your master's servants who have come with you, and as soon as you are up early in the morning and have light, depart." So David and his men rose early to depart in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Okay, so what's interesting, a little note, is that Achish, who we know is a Gentile, a Philistine, is actually talking as if God was his God. Now, we don't know for sure why he did this, because he said, "As surely as the Lord lives." And the word he used there for Lord is the covenant name of God, what we often say is Yahweh. And then he calls David an angel of God, Elohim. So we're not sure why Achish is doing this. Maybe he's just speaking to David in a way that David will understand. He's not acknowledging the fake pagan gods of Philistia, who his people worship, and is instead appealing to David, to his God. Or this could be a sign that Achish has come to believe in the true God of Israel through David's influence. We don't know. But it's very interesting, isn't it, that he talks about the Lord. But as we see, as they were marching to battle, the princes of the Philistines, of course, were inspecting the troops. And we could assume most of them met with their approval until they came upon David and his men. And they, as we saw, said, "What are they doing here?" Now we might ask ourselves, how did they know they were Israelites? David, they may not have been dressed all that differently. The clothing and the fashion would have been similar. There may have been a few subtle differences. But we could assume that David was already well known to the Philistines, as we've seen. He's a famous warrior, one of their most well-known enemies. He killed Goliath. And although that was years ago, he continued to be an enemy of this nation. But up until now, he had brokered a deal with Achish to stay out of view of these nobles. As we read in previous chapters, Achish let David and his men stay in Ziklag, which is a rural town away from their larger cities along the border with Judah. And so the princes wouldn't have seen David, and they wouldn't have been constantly aware that this man was living in their nation. But now David has nowhere to hide. He's with the king. The princes know David, and you saw they even remember that old song. So David is pretty famous, and even by our standards, this is pretty famous. You know, there was no television, no movies, no radio, nothing that could easily make someone famous. So for someone to be famous back then, they had to be really famous. When there was no telephones or telecommunications, just by word of mouth, and for that to happen, you had to really do something amazing. So David was pretty well known. But despite all the good David did for their king, the rest of his men didn't trust him. And as we saw, they had this suspicious fear that David would suddenly turn on them in the heat of battle and betray them to win back Saul's approval. Now we know that wouldn't work because Saul was dead set on killing David no matter what he did. But being as suspicious and paranoid as they were, this is what they thought was going to happen. So it seems Achish, even though he was king, was outvoted on this issue. He couldn't afford a mutiny, or the princes getting angry. They could have gotten so angry they would have abandoned him right before the battle. He couldn't have that. So he bent to their demands and told David to leave. Now, David's reaction might surprise us. We know he doesn't want to fight Israel, but he doesn't want to leave. Well, the reality is it was a shameful thing to get kicked out of the army right before the big battle. And David is a warrior. He's loyal, even though this is a Philistine. So he would have been shocked that at the last minute Achish said to go back to Ziklag. Now, let's go back and remember what David did. He had lied to make it seem like he was fighting Israel, when in reality, he would travel out and fight other nations and then come back and make it seem like he was raiding Israel's territory. But because of that lie, Achish then pressed him into marching with the whole army against King Saul. So now David, because of his lies, as we said, is now stuck in this difficult position because he can't really fight Israel. He's supposed to be their king. But here we see in this chapter, God is the one bailing him out, even though David's upset. It's kind of funny, huh? The last thing David would have wanted was to fight against his brothers. It would have disgusted and shamed David for him to kill a fellow Israelite. But when Achish told him to leave, David was arguing against it. Now, why would David do that? This is his out. It's like, here you go. Here's a chance to not fight Israel. Yet he's saying, what? No, I'm loyal to you, Achish. Well, this is just more evidence of how foolish and prideful we as human beings can be. Even David is not immune to this. We often fight against what's good for us. Our pride gets in the way, and we can't see God's help even when it's right in front of our eyes. And this is also a reminder that even bad situations can be used by God for our good. The truth of the matter is, David would have never forgiven himself if he had fought against Israel that day alongside the Philistines. Imagine how torn he would have been if he had to kill members of his own nation, perhaps even relatives in the tribe of Judah. God was intervening in an unusual way to get him out of this jam. So even though David got himself into this mess, God was helping him, because that is how good God is. Even when we screw up, even when we miss the mark, He has at work to help us. Now you might be tempted to think, wait a minute, David did this to himself. He deserves the shame of fighting his own people, or he should figure a way out of this himself. God shouldn't bail him out of this, right? Well, if you think that, you really don't know our God, because every one of us has sinned badly. We've done terrible things that often resulted in serious consequences. But despite this, God sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to die in our place and rise again, so that God can forgive us and give us eternal life. That is the good news of Jesus, and that is how grace works. God is showing us favor we do not deserve. And that includes helping us out of jams we got ourselves into. So sometimes Christians don't think they should ask God for help when they screwed up. You might even think to yourself, well, I got myself into this jam, so I'll get myself out of it. I can't ask God for help. I only ask God for help when I do everything right. Well, I hope you can see the stupidity of that thought. If you're the one who got yourself into a jam, why do you think you have what it takes to get out of it? You are very weak. You're just a mist that's here today and gone tomorrow. Why not turn to the God who lives forever, who has the power to help you? Some people, even Christians, think God is only willing to help them when we do everything right. But that's not true. The old saying, God helps those who help themselves, is a lie. In reality, God helps those who cannot help themselves. You can't make it through life on your own. The world is too unpredictable, the challenges are too hard, the problems too difficult to figure out on your own. Now, if you need proof, just look at the people of this world who don't have faith in God. Look at how they panic during COVID. Look at how they freak out after every election when the person they voted for doesn't win. Look at how they lose hope the moment things don't go their way. Why do they act like this? Because they think they have to figure it out themselves. When problems come that they have no control over, all they can do is panic. The reality is nobody can figure this out themselves. Left to our own devices, we'd screw up every time. Only by the grace of God can we make it through this life. God is ready and willing to provide the help you need through Jesus. And all you have to do is ask Him. So if you find yourself in a difficult situation, even a situation of your own doing, don't lose heart. God can and will help you through it. Yes, you may have done it to yourself, but that doesn't matter. All of God's help goes to the weak, the foolish, the undeserving. You can receive His goodness because Jesus Christ died in your place on the cross. His death and resurrection has secured for us God's abounding grace. Just like David, He will help you in your problems. Just turn to Him and ask. That's chapter 29. God had a very specific reason for intervening and getting David out of this situation. We find out exactly what happened and why He did this next time. This has been the Lightning Podcast. Every episode's available on all major podcast apps. Be sure to check out our website at lightningpodcast.org.